Hello, you are listening to Deeply Curious. My name is Cody Jensen, and joining me is my beautiful wife, Sarah.
Hello.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about risk.
Yes.
Just risking it all and what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Before we jump into today's episode, I just want to let you know that this podcast is only here because of the beautiful people over at the Jensen AV Club. That is our Patreon page. And this episode is produced by Christian B. Schmidt, associate produced by Greg and Christy Jensen, with a special shout out, a brand new crew member, Connor Dix.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining the Jensen AV Club.
Yes.
If you want to learn more how you can support this show and get access to exclusive content, head over to jensenav.club.
Yes.
So, risking it all.
Yes. Well, I think risk is an interesting conversation, maybe even particularly for us, because I actually don't feel like we've ever really risked that much.
Mm-hmm.
But people always tell us like, oh, that's a risky move, or I can't believe you're doing that. You guys are such risk takers.
Mm-hmm.
And it always catches me off guard because I don't feel that.
Yeah. Like we've been told pretty much our whole lives, our whole adult life, essentially, that it's like, you guys are such big risk takers. I just don't know if I can do that. The first of which being when we were 20 years old, we moved from Enid, Oklahoma, which had 50,000 people, to Tulsa, Oklahoma, which had 300,000 people. And whoa.
It was risky.
It was risky.
Yeah. And I think it's weird because I don't actually view big life decisions as risk, I guess. And so I don't know. I think it's worth talking about like what risk is and why it's worth taking it.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really get why people would say like moving to 2 hours away, like is risky and how they could never do it, and things like that. Like just that never resonated with me. I don't even understand that perspective. But the idea of risk and kind of my philosophy of risk, I guess, has always kind of been like, what's the worst that can happen?
Exactly. I think whenever we're faced with making what maybe some would call a risky decision, I always choose to look at it from the excitement point of view versus the terrifying point of view. I never feel like anything is as terrifying as we think it is. And so, just like, for example, when we just moved to Portland from New York City, we've never been to Portland before to visit even. And we made this decision and everyone's like, you're moving without even ever having been there? That's risky. Or I mean, a lot of people think it's cool, I think, but it just like, it doesn't even occur to me because I just see the possibility of like what's exciting. And like, I think maybe I'm just always looking for a new experience. And so it doesn't really feel like a risk to me because all I want is a new experience.
Right.
Regardless of what that experience is.
And but then also it's like, what's the worst that can happen?
Exactly.
It's like it's so risky moving to a city you've never been to before. And it's like, well, I'm not saying there's no risk involved, but the risk is that we won't like it and then we'll go somewhere else. Like that's not really a risk.
Yeah.
It's just there is the chance that we get here and
it doesn't work out.
We're like, oh, well, we'll just live here for a year and move somewhere else. Like that's basically the risk is that we will live here for a year and move somewhere else.
Yes.
So to me, it doesn't seem like a risky move. Same thing when we were like moving to Tulsa when we were 20 years old. It was like, you guys you're such risk takers and like, whatever. And it's like, again, okay, well, what's the worst that would happen? We move back to Enid?
Right. Yeah. And I think, but I think also, let's take it from perspective of somebody who, is like in a job that isn't necessarily like work from home or like very flexible. And you move to this new city, you're leaving your job and your family and, whatever. Why is it worth it? You know what I mean? Like, I think that because we could sit here and talk all day about how I don't feel like anything we've done is risky. But like, I think maybe we should talk about like, okay, I understand how you feel that this might be a risk. Let's talk about why you should do it anyway. Right? And I guess maybe it comes back to what's the worst that can happen. But I think like the point of risk is to like teach yourself who you are, you know, and like you're terrified. Maybe it's not even a move. Maybe it's just going to visit somewhere, you know, like you're terrified of international flight. Well, like once you get there, you've learned that you can do it. And like that's why it's worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Without risk, there is no change.
Exactly.
Like, I don't think you can truly progress and change in your life in like always, really, without some risk. And, you know, there's all types of risk. There's obviously risk of mortal danger. But then there's like risk of embarrassment, risk of retribution, risk of like just it not working.
There's like a loss of comfort, which people very much value their security and their comfort. But I think like comfort can become a trap. Like we stay in our security and in our comfort so long that like we can't breathe anymore, you know? And I think that's why you should risk things. And if you're not a risky person, great. You don't have to go out there and like do actual crazy things, right? But like, you know, just risk something. Yeah, you should because it's fun. But like just risk something to the point where you feel that uncomfortableness, you know? Like you need to get out of that comfort zone.
Yeah, and I think that like we were saying, staying within that comfort zone is a trap. And you can't breathe in the trap. And I feel like sometimes we equate that to the risk itself, like thinking about getting out, thinking about quitting, thinking about starting a new job, thinking about going to that school, thinking about whatever. It like gives so much anxiety that we think it's the risk itself that is so stifling,
right?
But it's the comfort of where you're at, like maybe that is so stifling.
Maybe sometimes it's not anxiety you're feeling, but subconscious excitement. Like your brain is like, yes, do it. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know.
But and I just think that with that type of stuff, it's just the fact that it's not the risk itself that is so scary. It's leaving your comfort zone that's so scary.
Which is why you should never create one. Maybe that's why I like moving around. So I love change. I do. I like... Change scares a lot of people, and I understand why, but like nothing in my life have I ever been scared to just like literally just upend and just like flip the table and do something completely different. It's exciting versus scary, I think. I mean, there is obviously some things about life and taking risks that are scary. Like it's terrifying to not know necessarily if you're gonna, you know, be able to pay your bills or whatever it is. Like there's some stuff that's scary, but I mean, you also just have to know yourself and know that you can take care of what needs to be taken care of and like make it work. I mean, it's pretty simple when you say it out loud. It doesn't feel simple, but I think it is.
And I think that taking those risks are the things that teach you that stuff.
Yeah, like, they really teach you who you are. And
like you go and you do this thing and you're like, oh yeah, I can do this. I'm capable. I'm, you know, surviving.
Yeah.
Like I'm capable of going somewhere new, or I'm capable of doing something new. I'm capable of like, you know, walking up to somebody at a party and saying hello, like,
right. Or like, jumping out of an airplane, or
like whatever it is, like it teaches you and gives you confidence afterward of, even if it was a terrible experience, like even if you did something and it was awful, it doesn't matter because you had the experience, and the experience taught you either one, you don't like doing that thing, or two, that you can still do it. Like you can fail and still survive, or you can accomplish the thing that you were planning on accomplishing, or you can make it outside of like your hometown or whatever. I'd keep going on and on and on about different examples, but it just teaches you that you are capable.
Yes. And like you said, like the experience, I don't know why, like an experience is, I'm sort of addicted to experiences, I think. Mm-hmm. Like I do not care if it's a terrible experience. I really don't. Like in the moment, I might even be incredibly frustrated, but I have the awareness that at least I'm doing this and I'm excited to tell this story later. It sucks. It's a terrible story, but I'm going to be able to share it later. Right. At least I have one.
Right. Yeah, I think of very similar things. Like just when things are happening in my life, I always think of my life as a future story. And so I am right there in that same boat of just like thinking about like if something happens and it's like, it did not go according to plan.
Yeah.
But then it's like, but this is going to make a better story. Mm-hmm. And so, it's, I can think of like a bunch of different examples, but one that we actually talked about on the podcast a while back was like the situation that I had on the plane on the way back from South Africa just craziness with people literally having seizures and Russians getting drunk and like causing a belligerent scene. It's like, did I want any of that happen? No. Did it, it like, I would rather have slept in the moment,
Right.
That night that I was being kept up by, all this yelling, I would rather have slept. But then the next day, I would rather have the story.
Exactly.
So like in the moment, it's like, man, this sucks, but this is going to be a great story later.
Yeah. Yeah. Or like when I use Iceland as an example a lot, because we went to Iceland in the very middle of winter and it was, so cold and the wind was blowing so hard. It was just like pelting us with rain and it was a little bit miserable. But I don't remember any of that now. Like when I think of Iceland, I don't think of any of that. I think of like the cool stuff. I just think it's like all about perspective, really, is what risk is.
That reminds me of just recently, like last week or something. I was listening to a podcast or an explainer video or something, and they were talking about how our brain naturally produces a chemical that helps us forget pain. And so we, like our bodies, help us to forget pain so that we can continue to do hard things, essentially.
That's why women keep having babies.
Right. And it's like women go through the most excruciating pain that a human can endure, I think. And then like months later, like, I'd do it again.
Yeah.
Like, do you remember? That you were screaming your head off? But it's like one with children is a different story because, you get the product of a child and people say that's worth it. I'm not sure yet. But then, it's like all of the pain involved is kind of like, forgot about. And it's the same thing whenever it's like it's to think about like a scar you have and then think about the story about it and then try to remember how bad it hurt.
Yeah.
And I can't. I cannot remember.
You're right.
Like
you can know logically that it hurt,
right?
But you can't feel the hurt. Yeah.
Like I can think of the time whenever I broke my arm or my collarbone, and like I remember the situation. I remember being in pain, but like I can't really like think about.
Yeah, I remember breaking my wrist and having to completely like spread my fingers out. It was like actually impossible to do because of where it broke, and I was screaming in pain in the emergency room trying to spread my fingers flat. And I remember like the scene. I can see myself looking down at my hand like sobbing, but I don't actually remember how it felt. You're right.
The kind of evolutionary reasoning for that, they were talking about within mammals, like a predatory animal, as in a lion, tiger situation, whenever they go out to get their food and they're hunting, let's say they come across a gazelle and they're hunting it and the gazelle kicks them in the head or the face, that hurts really bad. But the chemical essentially is there to help the liner, forget about the pain so that it won't starve to death, so that it won't be scared to go out and get the next gazelle.
That makes sense.
So it's a risk to go out and get the food because there's a risk that the food source is going to hurt you, but you need it to survive, or you have a great experience once you catch it. If you were to take, the metaphor. So in life, I think that a lot of times, sometimes things hurt, sometimes things go wrong, sometimes,
you can prepare all you want and it won't matter.
But I think once we remove ourselves from that situation, we forget about the pain and we remember the experience. And I think I've heard this quote a long time ago, no idea who to attribute it to, but you only regret the experiences that you don't have.
Yes. 100%. Good,
bad, regardless. Like, you only regret the experiences that you didn't have.
Yeah.
It's like you never, never is a strong word, because I'm sure somebody can think of an experience that they, whatever.
Yeah.
But, generally speaking, for a,
we're not talking about traumatic life events.
A platitude on the wall. You only regret the experiences you don't have. Just thinking about it in positive terms. Like if you're on your deathbed or something, it's like you don't say, "Oh man, I regret that one time that I moved to Costa Rica for 3 months." You're like, "I regret that I never went and lived in Costa Rica for 3 months because I always wondered what that was going to be like, or I wondered what that was going to be." And I guess you would, if you were on your deathbed after the 3 months in Costa Rica and you're like, I wish I wouldn't have come to Costa Rica for 3 months because it literally is killing me.
Oh, like if Costa Rica made you sick?
Yes. And you're like,
like Toby in The Office went to Costa Rica and broke his neck or whatever on the first day. I think, well, that aside, I think that there's just something really cool about proving to yourself that you can do it, that you can survive whatever it is life throws at you or that you throw at you, that you can just like man up and figure it out. Man up is a terrible term. I shouldn't have used that. But you know what I mean? Like, I just think there's something really cool about being able to do that. And I think that the way that I view risk is I like just holding on to that feeling. Like when I see a decision that could be risky in the, definition of what risky might be for you, I choose to forget about the risk and look at the idea of like, okay, if I can do this, I can do anything. And that's kind of why I think I dive headfirst into situations. Because it's cool. It's cool to be like, yeah, I lived in New York for 2 years.
Yeah.
Don't want to do it again. Although, to be fair, I have already forgotten about the pain of New York. And I was looking through photos earlier today and I was like, oh, remember New York at Christmas time? Not when it was blizzarding. Yeah.
Yeah. And whenever the bills aren't coming due.
Yeah. Well, we don't need to talk about the bills.
Yeah.
I was more talking about like the harshness of New York. That's already faded a little bit for me.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, New York and snow is so pretty. I'm not remembering how miserable it is. But I think, anyways, it's just always worth it, regardless of the outcome. And I think if you can, like, we're not supposed to live in fear. Like, we're really not. Like, there's a reason that your brain creates that chemical to like take the bad memories away, right? Is so that like you get out there and do it again, because that's what we're supposed to do. And I think like letting your life be determined by something you fear is so much less fun than letting it be determined by something that's exciting for you. And honestly, it doesn't have to be. A lot of times when you say words like risk and excitement and adventure or whatever, it sounds like it's going to be this like, crazy storybook kind of, you go to Costa Rica. But it doesn't have to be that. Like, it can be really tiny risks or that seem tiny of just like putting yourself out there and like going to meet the neighbor, you know, that's a risk. But like your best friend could be in that scenario. You don't know. I think it's worth trying.
That made me think about like you could also get into a FOMO situation with that type of attitude of like being where you have to go do everything.
For sure.
Or like you're scared to say yes to this one thing because my best friend could be at that other thing.
Yeah. I guess that's true. But I think more so look at the positive side of it. Like FOMO is still letting yourself make decisions based on like something negative because it's still a fear.
Right.
Fear of missing out. Right. So like, don't let yourself be guided by that, but by the excitement of a new experience or a new friend or a new thing that you didn't know you could do before, like gardening, whatever it is. Like that's a risk if you don't know how to take care of anything and then you choose to invest your time to teach yourself how to take care of plants. You know, that's a risk. You're making yourself learn something new that you might fail at.
Yeah, I like the example of like if people who want to get out of their job and they want to go freelance or they want to go independent or they want to travel or, you know, whatever it is. And that security, again, we're so scared of losing our safety, losing our comfort than we are about the next thing. And I think that, you know, thinking about, okay, you want to quit your job and you want to go freelance. You know, obviously you have to be smart and build, you know, work hard, you know, in the beginning where you're kind of doing both at the same time, blah, 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 build it up, build it up, build it up. But then if you're preparing and you're not stupid.
Right.
And you save, let's say just arbitrarily like a minimum of 3 months of life expenses. You save 3 months of life expenses. And you have that. Now think about quitting and you're like, okay, what is the worst that could happen? And barring, you know, life catastrophes, but in a normal situation, the worst that would happen is you get another job in 2.5 months.
Exactly.
Like you quit your job, you go full force doing this thing you're going to do. And if at the, you know, if you're approaching that 3-month period where you're going to run out of that nest egg that you created, you go get another job. So the risk in quitting to do that thing, the literal risk is you get a different job.
Right.
And when I think that is what is kind of the mentality, kind of the mindset that I like to take into my life decisions of like really saying realistically, what is the worst that's going to happen here? Because you can think about the worst that's going to happen in a make-believe sense because we're really good at that. That's what keeps us so scared because we're like, I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to, you know, I'm going to be homeless. I'm going to, you know, whatever it is, lose my family and all this type of stuff. And it's like, but if you actually prepare and you actually set steps into place and you're not stupid, then what really is the worst is going to happen? And in most of the time, the worst is going to happen is not even worse. It's just different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like you always hear those stories of people who they've become successful in some way and they are like telling their story, right? And they always start off with, oh, I maxed out a credit card in order to move to New York City with $17 in my bank account, you know, something like that. They're like, I wouldn't suggest that's how you should do it, but
I started my company by selling $1 million worth of product that I hadn't even created yet.
Exactly.
It's like just because I said yes, it's like I wouldn't recommend it, but I did it.
But I think, I mean, you obviously have to say I don't recommend it because it's not good advice. But I think there's something to be said about that. I think there's a reason that so many success stories start with, I mean, this is what I did, but I don't know that it was, because it's risk.
It's high risk.
High risk, high reward. Mm-hmm. And that's just how it works. And I think there's something to be said about look, you don't necessarily have to throw yourself into a scenario like that. If you want to prepare, by all means, please prepare. you know,
I mean, I've never done
we've
anything
never
that
done
crazy.
anything like that. But I also do think that there comes a moment where you just have to throw yourself in. Mm-hmm. Like, you can prepare all you want, but there's a certain attitude that all of those people have, regardless of how they made it or like what their beginning story is. Like, there's a certain attitude that they had that I think you have to find in yourself. And it's just the, like, being willing to dive in head first into the deep end, like not really knowing if you can swim.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a tried and true metaphor of like, throwing the kid in the deep end and see if they can swim. And it's like, one, that's like truth and applicable to pretty much everything. Of just like, we will just sit around idly if we don't just jump in and do it.
And I mean, this is part of my thing in certain aspects of life is like, I don't feel like I'm qualified for almost anything. Right. So I like don't do things because I'm like, well, I'm not really qualified yet. I have to be an expert before I can, like, I've never done this. Why would they hire me to do it? That kind of thing. But it's like, just because like on paper you've never done it doesn't mean you don't have the skills to do it, And so like, it's really easy to get in that mindset of like not doing something because you don't feel qualified, but the only way to know if you're qualified is to actually do it.
Right.
And so it's just like, it's really hard to remember.
I mean, prime example, literally this podcast.
Yes.
It's like, I didn't think about it as being a risk, but let's say like there's something like a podcast, that, you want to do.
Right.
And you're scared to do it. And, it just comes down to like, the worst that can happen is nobody listens.
Right, exactly.
I mean, yeah, that may hurt your ego, but I mean,
right.
Your ego needs to be hurt anyway.
Right.
So win-win.
Yeah. And also I think this is a little different than risk, but there's something to be said about doing something just because you want to do it. And who cares if people listen or not. But yeah, I think when you really like strip it down, there's no negative repercussion to risk. I don't think. You either learn or you succeed.
Yeah, but sometimes like jumping out of an airplane, you either succeed or you die.
Doesn't matter.
So
you died taking a risk.
I agree with your sentiment, but also I can poke a lot of holes in it.
Well, we're not trying to make it any definitive generalized statement is not all truth, obviously. You can't. I mean, that doesn't apply to literally every life scenario ever. But I think generally speaking, it does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one thing that I want to talk about, the risk, like within this concept of risk, and it does kind of get outside of risk, but I've been wanting to tell this story of us moving to New York. And that is, I mean, what a lot of people would consider as like the riskiest thing that we've ever done. Mm-hmm. And I did not feel like it was a risk.
Right.
And specifically because of like part of the story that I'm about to tell. But also I think we're just like naturally, I don't know, predisposed to not feel that way. But anyways, moving to New York City was like, I guess, the biggest life decision we've made, which you could say was the riskiest. But so whenever we were thinking about moving to New York City, we had a few friends who in the Midwest area that we have known for a long time, who we wanted to start a creative agency with. I was a creative director at the church that we were at in Tulsa for 8+ years, and had met, and wanted to kind of start building outside of that, and creating these other things and move into more advertising. And I had a couple of friends who were like in it as well, and we're like, we're all creative people, and we wanted to start something together. So we're going to create this creative agency. But at the same time, Sarah and I had been to London, and
we were dead set on moving to London.
We both loved London. Like our visits there felt like home. Like we really wanted to move there. And Sarah was also very enthusiastic about getting there. And it was, so we were like, well, we know that our time in Tulsa is, coming to a close. Like we feel really great about the time that we have invested into Tulsa and the amount of growth and the people that we've become, the foundations that we have set upon our like emotional and spiritual lives and our financial lives. And so we feel like now is really no better moment than now to finally make the move. And so, we're trying to decide New York or London.
Right.
And
well, it was really, I want to go to London.
Right.
But I would settle for New York if these, if these things lined up.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the other two guys that we're talking to and starting the process of creating this creative agency together, we kind of all decided that New York was going to be the place, because all three of us wanted to live in New York at some point. And so it was kind of like, oh, wow, this is amazing. Like it felt so natural because all three of us essentially had this kind of idea separately of like, we should start doing our creative stuff together. And we all kind of came together around the same time and started voicing this, like, what do you think about this? And everybody's like, I was thinking the same thing. So we're like, wow, this is serendipitous. And then we started talking about what we wanted to do. And then we started talking about where we wanted to go. And everybody's like, I think I want to go to New York. And then the other two were like, yeah, me too. And so like, interesting. So we're in this process while at the same time, Sarah and I are like, we really want to go to London. So we had decided, we're working on this like creative thing. And we decided that what we want it to be is like this collective of creatives where it's not some like, top person who's like, directing the other people to like, hey, design this, hey, do that. We want it to be a collective of creatives where we are partners in like crime and we all have our things that we do and we make each other, build each other up and all that type of stuff. And so we kept talking about this creative collective we wanted to do. And then it comes to this point where Sarah and I are really like trying to decide. We know we're moving. We've already told like our pastor and subsequently boss as well, because I worked at the church, that we're making plans to move.
Yeah.
Don't know where yet.
Don't know where, don't know when.
Yeah. And so our church, we have this like monthly, I believe, prayer gathering. And so it's just a place to go and just to pray alone and with others and to worship. And so we're at this thing. We're deep into like this season of like trying to figure this thing out of where we're going to go. And the service is essentially over. It's wrapping up. And the pastor asks everybody to kind of get in groups of 3 or 4 and ask each other, what we should pray about and do that. So Sarah and I get into a group with 2 other people, and it comes to our turn to like say, what we want to pray for. And we say, we want to know if we should go to London or not. Like we really want to go to London. And it would be awesome, like to have like like a definitive, like, yes, do it, because, life is easier when God tells you to do things. Rarely happens, but sometimes. So we're like, it'd be awesome if we could get just a little sign.
Yeah.
And so we're like, we want to know if we like should go to London or not, like just some sort of piece about it, whatever it is, like just direction for London. And so we pray, we part ways. As I'm walking away, a guy who was attending the service, who I knew but I've never really like talked to before, came up to me and he said, "Hey, Cody." I was like, "Hey," and then he's like, a little while ago, whenever the band was playing and we were worshiping, I looked over at you, and whenever I saw you, God told me to come tell you collective. And he was like, I don't know what that means. I tried to look up the word collective because it means I don't even know like what that word means. So I hope that means something to you. And I was like, I have tears in my eyes because obviously the moment he said collective, I know what that is. And I'm like, yes, that absolutely means something. And then just started talking through that of like, it means New York. Like the decision between going to London and not doing the creative agency, or going to New York and doing the creative agency. And so it was like God literally sent somebody with a word to me of, hey, collective, and it was like the moment he said it, I knew heavy, like we were going to New York. And so we stopped making plans for London.
Yeah.
And we immediately started making plans for New York. And everything started happening so fast.
We moved within like 2 months.
Yeah, 2 months of that moment. And Sarah, when we got home, we started talking about like what we need to do, sell the house, do all this stuff. And so she pulls out our wall calendar and just flips a couple months ahead and just arbitrarily circles June 27th. Just circles it and says moving day. She said, she was like, no idea,
Right. We just had like a general timeline that we wanted to.
We want to move that summer,
and needed to put things on the calendar.
And so we're making a plan. And so to make a plan, we need to know like, well, what do we need to get done in a certain amount of time to make it happen? And so she just arbitrarily circles June 27th, moving day. We still have to sell a house. So
we had to fix up the house.
Right. We had to, because we needed to like do the things, get the house ready for market, then list the house, then sell it. And the process of, listing a house to the moment you sell it is however long that takes. It could be one day, it could be months, depending on if the right buyer comes along. Then once somebody says, here's my offer, and you accept the offer, generally speaking, that's a 30-day process from that moment.
Yeah.
So,
plus we had to sell all of our stuff and everything like that.
So like just putting that 2 months out is crunch time. Well, she marks that date down. We get the house fixed up, ready for market, take pictures of it, list it. We have a buyer within a week.
3 days.
3 days, a buyer comes along. Then the buyer says, hey, because we accepted the offer or whatever, or I don't remember exactly the order, but essentially like we're accepting the offer and the buyer says, hey, I'm going to do a cash deal on this. So we don't have to do the normal closing. And it's so we can do it a little bit faster. Is it okay if we set the closing date for June 27th? And Sarah and I just looked at each other like, what?
We literally drove out of town on June 27th.
We like packed up the trailer, went to the closing agency, signed the paper, and drove out of town on the day.
Yeah.
Everything just like fell into place. And, as I'm telling the story, obviously you can chalk this all up to serendipity. My worldview as a Christian, I attribute the serendipitous moments as, just God's hand being, on it. Is just like it, just everything happening, for, a specific reason. So that is my take on it. But regardless, it's just a fun serendipitous story. And so, I felt like God was, directing, and like the 27th, like we're out the day, just like random day that was picked. So we drive to New York City, and we're there in 2 days, 3 days, whatever it was. And we drive into Brooklyn because we had been doing a bunch of research before, and we're like, okay, for the amount of money we want to spend on rent, which is already more than what we want to spend on rent, but it's New York City, so you have to. The only way we can stay within that, frame is to be in Brooklyn. And so, we love Manhattan. That's where we fell in love with New York City. But we're like, if we're going to do this thing, if we're going to do it in budget, we're going to be in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So we told everybody we're moving to Brooklyn. And in all those original videos, even, you can go back and you can see, we're saying we're moving to Brooklyn. So we drive into Brooklyn, and we get a hotel, and we are in Brooklyn for 3 or 4 days straight. We are just going around looking at the Fort Greene area, going, different areas, just looking for apartments, just exploring, just seeing, scoping everything out, looking on Street Easy, doing all the stuff.
Yeah.
And then after a few days in Brooklyn, I don't know, we both felt pretty heavy, I would say.
Well, it was getting a little anxious. First, probably because we didn't know the rental process there is extreme, and so it just felt like, okay, we don't have a place to live. We need a place to live. We need a place to live, and it didn't happen immediately because the rental market there is just so crazy.
Yeah.
And so I think we were both feeling a little anxious about, okay, how do we get an apartment?
And like I said, we both were feeling this heaviness, and we were like, okay, we believe that God spoke to us directly, and told us to go to New York. So we felt confident in that. Everything happened so in the way it should to get here. It just felt so right. We felt no anxiety.
It was very easy.
So eased to get there. And so it was why are we feeling this heaviness? Did we miss it? We were doubting our, basically doubting if we heard from God, if this was the wrong decision, we were just, did we miss it? Is kind of the way we felt. And then as those days were progressing, Sunday morning rolls around, and we were like, well, we should go to a church and check one out. And so I had a couple churches on my list to check out that I had heard about. And one of them was in Brooklyn and the other one was in Manhattan. And since we were in the Brooklyn in our hotel, we're like, well, let's just go to the one here in Brooklyn. And we start to go there. And I realize partly way there that I forgot something back at the hotel that we needed. And so we went back to the hotel and took care of the stuff. And then by the time everything was done, we had missed the service in Brooklyn. And we're like, okay, well, we still have time to make it to the other church that's in Manhattan. So we get on the subway and we go over to Manhattan, and we pop out of the subway stairway, and both of us just took this huge breath of air, and we were like, oh, this is why we love New York. We just both felt all of that weight that we had been feeling for the last 3 or 4 days just leave. And we looked at each other. We went to Starbucks because we were still a little early, and we started talking about that feeling that we just felt of all of that pressure being released as soon as we stepped in Manhattan. And it's we felt that was the leading of the Holy Spirit, or God directing us this is the place that I have for you. And so we walked to the church that I had picked out, and we walk in, and we're immediately greeted by some guy, and he starts talking to us and then asking us oh, you just moved here, that's really cool, are you looking for an apartment? And we're like, yeah. And he's like, I know Stephanie who goes here is a realtor. I should get you guys connected. And we're like, yeah, that'd be awesome. So he immediately leads us over to Stephanie. And so we start talking, second person we talked to in New York. And she's like, we were talking to her about like getting an apartment and like our budget and like what we're looking for and all that type of stuff. And we're like, we were thinking we were going to be in Brooklyn, but then like just now, like we feel like maybe we should be in Manhattan, but we don't think we can be in Manhattan for this budget. And she's like, oh yeah, we can definitely find you something like that, but you'll be like Upper East Side for that price. We're like, well, we don't want to be in Upper East Side, but we do feel like we're supposed to be in Manhattan, so let's go for it. And so service starts, and we're going, enjoying the service or whatever. And we find out, so this is just some serendipity here. The church is called C3. The church that we had helped start and were a part of in Tulsa for almost a decade is called City Church. Well, immediately upon walking into C3, it felt like home. Like it felt like City Church.
City Church, yeah.
And they start talking, and then we find out that C3 stands for Community City Church. Mm-hmm. It's literally called almost the same name. Mm-hmm. They start talking, and they start talking about their dinner parties that they have every week. And at City Church in Tulsa, we had this thing we called family meal every week. And as they were describing it, it was the exact same, like almost exact same model of the way that they did their small groups. And so we were like, oh, that's like cool and interesting that this is happening. And then in Tulsa, we had started this thing called Love Tulsa, where we cancel service a couple times a year. And we just, everybody who was going to come to service, we go out and serve the community in different capacities. Well, the week we show up, they announce that their annual Love New York is coming up, where they go out and serve the community. And we're just like staring at each other, like just mouths open, like, what is happening? Mm-hmm. This is insane.
Yeah.
So all of that serendipity of just like the fear that we had, in Tulsa, like coming to New York City, is that we weren't going to be able to find a community like we had at City Church. Just like weren't going to be able to find a church that we loved in the way that City Church was, and then immediately walk into a church that like is so similar and felt so amazing, like home.
Who had a realtor who was going to help us?
Yeah. Who also the second person we met is a realtor who's going to help us. So, anyways. Long story continued. We meet with Stephanie. She's taking us around. She's like, let's look at some East Village stuff. And we start doing that, which just side note, like nothing to do with the story really. But she takes us into the East Village, looks at apartments that were in our budget of around $2,000. And they were atrocious. Like I was just aghast. Like just the living conditions of which you would live for $2,000 a month in East Village blew my mind. And I was like, what? And she's like, so I have a few more in East Village, but they're going to be like this. And we're like, no, we can move on. Let's go.
Yeah.
Upper East Side it is. We thought we were going to be cool East Village kids. Nope.
Yeah.
So she takes us.
I had to have a refrigerator.
Yeah, exactly. Like some of them literally had a mini fridge. Mm-hmm. Anyways.
Yeah.
She takes us
weird.
to the Upper East Side. We find an apartment it's a really good sized studio. It's a little under budget. We're like, oh, okay, cool. Like this is it. Like this feels really good. This is like, not the area that we thought, but also it's not bad. And
it's a nice apartment.
Really nice apartment. We feel really good about this. So we go to apply for it and we submit our application. They're like, oh, sorry, somebody just submitted an application like a few hours ago.
Yeah.
Like
lost it.
Oh gosh. And so like we kind of felt down. We really felt like that was supposed to be the one, like felt really good about it. And then we were a bit bummed. Because you just fall in love with the space, and then you can't have it. So then we go to another Upper East place that's even bigger than that one, and I would say maybe even a little bit nicer for the same price. And we're like, it was God saying, hold up, wait a minute, I got something better for you. So we put our application in for that, and because we were moving to New York City with no jobs, we had no we had no proof of future income. We only had proof of savings.
Yeah.
Which landlords do not care about in New York City, I find out.
They only care about future income.
They do not care how much money you have, only how much money you can prove you're going to have in the future. Yeah. So she was like, because you don't have jobs, it's going to be very difficult to get you in somewhere. But this place is one of the most lenient landlords I've ever dealt with. So if you don't get in here, we're going to have to look into subleasing or something else, because I don't think you can get your own lease if this person doesn't accept you. Do the application. And we're like, we have everything in order. Yeah. We even had a guarantor for this one because they they required it with all of these things, and we had that. We had all of it done, but they nitpicked specifically where this income was coming from, whether it was on the tax return, whether it was business income or personal income, and most of it was business income. And they said we can't count business income. Yeah. And it only has to be on personal.
They didn't like it.
We go through the whole process with this, and we, again, kind of fell in love with this apartment. Maybe not that strong, but we really liked the apartment, and we felt good about it. And we felt like we had also kind of told ourselves, that we didn't get the other apartment because God was holding us out for the bigger one. And then now we're not getting this one. So, it's kind of like those doubts, because sometimes God is in things. Sometimes it's just things that happen. It just is what it is. I always have a hard time figuring out if it's me misattributing things to, God that are not, or missing God when it is. I think that's probably my biggest doubts of whether or not the things that I think are of me or of God.
Yeah.
And anyways, we don't get the apartment.
Yeah.
And we were like,
they denied us.
And she had told us, if we don't get this apartment, because this is a lenient landlord, then
there's almost no chance.
There's no chance of getting an apartment. And so we were pretty bummed. What? Wait, did we miss it again? I just, what is happening?
Yeah. And then, by this time we were almost 2 weeks in to living in a hotel.
Yeah. Expensive New York hotels. We were doing New York hotels and Airbnbs, just doing whatever was cheapest. Yeah. The cheapest that we could possibly find. And still 2 weeks in is very expensive.
Yeah.
So we get denied. We're back at the hotel. And the next morning I open up the Street Easy app, and it was new listing. And it was Lower East Side on Bowery. And the pictures looked really nice. It was the layout that we want, without any weird walls or nooks, and
hard to come by in New York.
The bathroom looked nice, and the kitchen looked nice, which also very hard to come by. Yeah. And it was a little bit over budget that we wanted, but not crazy. And after everything we had already seen, and after all that we had gone through, I was like, okay, I'm willing to pay an extra $100. It's fine.
Yeah.
So it's a tiny bit under budget or over budget, and we had had a few experiences with apartments that were in nice areas and looked as nice as this one did in the photos, and were in budget, where the realtor would call and it was a fake listing where they were just trying to get calls, so they could show you other stuff. Well, I sent it to her. I was like, "Hey, is this real?" And she's
it looks fake.
You're it looks too good to be true. And she's like, I don't know. So she called, and then 30 minutes later calls back and says, it's real, and we can go see it today at noon. And I was like, we'll be there.
Yeah.
So we walk in, and it is exactly what we want. As far as it's great remodeled bathroom.
Yeah. The kitchen. Bathroom isn't 50 years old. Yeah. Kitchen has a fridge.
It's in Lower East Side on Bowery. Yeah. For the budget. And
great location.
The moment we walked in and saw that it wasn't a dump,
yeah,
we were like, yes, start signing papers right now. So we submit our application, and they accept it. We go to the leasing, and again, we don't have jobs. We're applying for this stuff with hopes that they will
let it slide,
that we actually don't have any proof of future income.
Yeah.
And she's like, I mean, we'll see if we get, accepted or whatever, we'll submit the application. Submit the application. They accept it or like soft accept it or whatever it is until we actually go meet at the leasing agency and whatever.
It was, we accept, but we have the right to deny you at the signing if we want.
So we go to the signing. We're talking to them, and we find out the reason that they accepted us is because of two reasons. One, the listing agent that is their exclusive listing agent on this building was leaving to go to his home country like the next day. And he was going away for like 3 months or something, and he had to make the deal happen that day before he left. And the owner of the building was talking to us and like, yeah, I mean, as I was looking through the application and stuff, like I saw that you were from Oklahoma. And so I wanted to have you guys come in because I was really curious of why somebody would move from really conservative Oklahoma to liberal New York. And he was like, and then he kept talking and talking and talking. He basically, he didn't really want to know why, because
he just wanted to tell us his fun facts about Oklahoma.
He just wanted to tell us that he knew things about Oklahoma because he didn't actually let us talk. We were like, well, it's because, and then he started talking again. And then he told us like some facts about Oklahoma that he knew. Yeah. And then he was like, all right, paper sign, get the keys on Friday.
Yeah.
That was it. And like, so the timing of it and like the owner seeing that we were from Oklahoma
made him curious.
And then the listing agent had to do it that day. And so they were just like, did it. And then we get the apartment, we move in like 2 days later. It was really fast. But the apartment that we got was right on the same block as C3, the church that we had met Stephanie at, that we on the third or fourth day in New York City. It was like on the same block.
Yeah.
So it was like another one of those serendipitous things of just just really lifted our spirits of like confirming of like, we go through this whole process, we love this church, and then we go through this whole ordeal of getting this apartment and feeling not sure what is right, what is, not, and all that type of stuff. And then we get led into basically this blessing of an apartment that is on the same block as this church that we want to build community at. And so anyways, the apartment is the apartment, the one that's
the one that you've all seen.
The one that you've all seen is that's the apartment. And just to be like, it felt like such a blessing to have this apartment at the price that we had. And as we started like meeting people, we would tell them like, where do you live? And we're like, oh, Bowery and Rivington. And they're like, whoa, baller. And they would literally, that's what people was like. Multiple people made comments of like, dang,
you
baller.
Live there?
Like you live, like what job do you have? Because it's so expensive. And we find out like after living there for a long time, we find out that the apartment next to us, in the apartment building next to us, they rent out for $4,000 a month. The building next to that one, which these are bigger apartments. They're not like tiny little studios, but they're still like, one bedrooms or
indicative of the area.
Yeah. And then the building next to that one, rents apartments for $20,000 a month. Yeah. And that's just that's the first 6 or 8, I don't remember, the first 4 or 5 floors or whatever it is, are $20,000 a month. And then there's a penthouse suite at the top of that one that I have no idea how much that one is.
Yeah.
And then we find out after we left New York that they rented the apartment we were in for over $2,600.
Yeah. So we had a good deal.
So anyways, just the amazing deal of an apartment and the amazing location is what was the catalyst for you listening to my voice right now.
Yeah.
Because we were able to outfit the apartment in the way that we did. We made the apartment tour video. The apartment tour video, did as well as it did and brought eyeballs to the content that we were creating, which created an audience to watch our films, which obviously we started out being more like YouTubers and just like taking that on, and that became our job. That's what we did for the full 2 years that we were in New York City. That's what got us connected. Like getting that apartment is what got us into the YouTube career. It's what got us connected with the people that we got connected with in New York that became friends. It was the catalyst for me like pursuing more of a filmmaking career instead of a design career. Like everything that's happened and all that we are doing right now as you're listening to me is because of following that like word from God that I received of collective to go to New York City. Then the leading of from getting the, all up into getting that apartment to create the video that we did is what led us to be doing everything that we have right now.
Yeah.
And so just about risk.
Yeah, like none of that would happen if we hadn't like decided to risk leaving Tulsa.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd still probably have a really great life in Tulsa, honestly. I mean, we'd be chilling with our friends, doing work that you enjoy for a church that we are very passionate about. But like, there's just so much more or so much difference that can happen. Like, it's not necessarily better or worse. It's just different. And like, you never really know what's out there.
Right.
Till you go find it.
And like, just side thing of just video in general. Like video is what I got my start in as a creative whenever I was very young. And I like loved video. And I did video for many, many, many years. But I kind of got out of doing exclusively video because I needed to be a photographer and I needed to be a designer and I needed to be all these other things that I also enjoyed, but I needed to be them for the career that I had. And I also felt like I needed more people involved with video to be able to do that all the time, because I need people to help me. Because I didn't, the concept of like vlogging, like type stuff, first person filmmaking just wasn't a thing. And so I went on this other trajectory, and then whenever I'm like basically handed this new career path and I start making videos and I fall back in love, or not even fall back in love, just realize like that I forgot that I like how much it energizes me and how much I love making video and pursuing. Like I have no idea, like we're only 2 years in, a little over 2 years from that moment. And yes, I am making videos on YouTube. Yes, I am making podcasts, and I do love everything that we're doing. But we still have no idea what the outcome is going to be, like of where this is going to lead ultimately in my life.
Right.
And then as a aside to, this story is going back to the beginning of starting this creative agency and like receiving this, what the Protestant church world calls a prophetic word. I mean, just somebody received a word from God and delivered it to the person that intended. And, I received a direct word from God of collective, which is so specific to creating this creative agency. And we moved to New York, and the two guys that I'm going to start this with both had romantic partnerships that developed within this time, which took their lives into different directions. And so each of them, didn't make it to New York. And so now it's just me in New York with this word of collective. And so I'm like the whole time just thinking like, what did it mean? Like, why? Like, it's just questioning like of what am I supposed to do with this? Like, it got me to New York. Is that the entire reason that it was specifically collective? And then just thinking like, I really felt specifically called to New York, that we were supposed to go there. And as we were there over the 2 years, I knew we were supposed to be there for some reason, but nothing big ever happened. Like nothing as far as as far as like a grand thing, like where I could tell this story and say, God told me collective. We moved to New York City. I tell the whole story that I just told, and then this happened. And everybody like, whoa, like, I can't believe that happened. And I kept waiting for that of like, this is going to happen. This thing, I know that God called us here. He called us here for a reason. Like, what is that reason? And as we were, wrapping up our 2 years, I was asking this question again because I knew we were leaving. And so I'm like, well, what was the reason? Like, why were we called here? Because I don't know what it is, because I kept thinking it needed to be something with an amazing, grand story where somebody's life was changed, in some way, or, whatever it was. And then I basically had to learn, and talking to wise counsel and things like that, it's just that the grand thing was the fact that we went, and the fact that we learned so much about ourselves. We learned so much about the world and other people, and about empathy and about each other, and grew in all of these areas that would have not been possible in other places. And then I'll let you tell what Stephanie ended up telling you, which I think is really good.
Yeah. I mean, I was just talking to her about all this stuff. Like, we came here for 2 years. It was great. It was fun, but we don't really know why, blah, blah, blah. And she just said something along the lines of, whenever a parent takes their child to the playground, they don't expect anything of their child except to play. That's all the playground is for. And she said sometimes God just gives you things to play. And there doesn't have to be an agenda or a reason other than he just wants you to have fun. And I think it's really important to remember that not everything in life has to have a specific outcome or an agenda, or, you need to check these things off the list and call it good. Sometimes life is it's just there to enjoy.
Yeah. And so, I loved that perspective. And as I kept kind of thinking and praying on this reasoning, I realized that my desire for, this grand story has to do with my pride, and has to do with that I want to have this thing where God told me to go to New York and this thing happened. And I wasn't given that. And I think that my desire for that story was more for my pride of having the story instead of seeing what actually did happen, which, was all of the little stuff,
right?
That added up to one big thing, in our life, as far as values and, knowing thyself, essentially. And then just thinking about how I will never know, I may never know what the big thing or the real, tangible, example thing would be of why I feel like God told us to move to New York, because it may be I had to go to plant a seed. I had to go and be something for someone that eventually will, change those people, that person's life. But I won't be there for the result.
Right. Well, and it also can be as simple as you got back to what you originally started in,
right?
Which is video. I mean, there's so many things that might make a huge impact, might not. We don't know. Yeah.
But
that's not really the point. The point, like I said, is not necessarily something on a to-do list that you check off. It's just risk for the sake of risk.
Right. Which I'm okay with.
Yeah.
It's just, I think that is the thing, though, that I think I struggle with the most is if, what was the reason? I want to know, you know, and I already do know, but I still kind of feel like it's not big enough. You know, sometimes I still feel like I want to know. I want the big thing. I want the grand romantic gesture, you know, of the moment of what it is. And it was so incremental that it was a huge thing. It was inside, you know, of me. It was inside of you. It was us. And I am grateful as well for the personal change. I think it was 100% worth it. Like the personal change that we went through, the life values that we were able to come out of New York with, and figuring out who we are, what we believe, what we know to be the pillars of what we want to build our life on, worth it. Like that's more than enough reason. But I still like basically feel my pride though, like saying like that, you know, want something big or more showy, not big. I think because what we have is big. I mean, this career, like I'm grateful for the career that is created for us as well. But it's like I want something showy, like to have of like I obeyed and God delivered, and it's not that He didn't, but it's not the show that I want, and I think that's the thing that I struggle with the most, as far as like. It's not the struggle of not having it. It's the struggle of wanting it, of like telling myself like that's like to kill the pride.
Yeah.
But I think I still have like some pride issue in that of like wanting to have the big thing.
I don't feel that at all.
But I am like, I would say I have come to grips with what we have and what we did within the last like 2 months of leaving New York. 100% of like realize like when we actually started truly taking account of everything that had happened, all that we had accomplished and had learned, I was like, okay, this is like
did a lot.
We did a lot. That experience, we're gonna leave this place with so much more than what we came with. On the inside, not in the bank account.
Right. Never in the bank account. But with New York.
But with the inside, and I was like, I'm fully like find the beauty in that.
Right. Well, that is the point of risk.
Yeah.
It is not about what you accomplish necessarily, or like the tangible things, but it's about everything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we risked moving, I guess, whenever we went to Tulsa. And when we did that, we got the relationships of our life. We built a foundation of emotional and spiritual health that we will stand on for the rest of our life. Moving to New York was a risk, but we gained so much internal confidence and motivation and solidifying of goals and values.
And also just, there is something about the bragging rights of saying like, yeah, I survived New York. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's something about being able to truly survive New York City that I feel like is worth, that's worth moving there for itself. I don't know. It gives you a little bit more like confidence, I guess, in what you can do. Because the song is true. Like if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. That's really what it feels like.
Oh yeah. Another thing is that the move to New York got it out of Sarah's system.
Oh, for sure.
We couldn't have lived as functional human beings if we would have moved to Portland first.
No, I still would be so unhappy.
Because we would have moved here, and it's 2 years now, we would be moving to New York. Because if Sarah, the whole time we were here, no matter how much we loved it, would be like, but what about New York?
Yeah.
It's not New York.
Yeah.
So we would move.
I would have said that about Brooklyn too, honestly.
Yeah. So it needed to happen in order for us to functionally move on as humans.
Yeah.
And it did, and it taught us so much. Now we took a big risk and moved to Portland, Oregon with no prospects of what we're going to do here. And without visiting, we still really haven't even seen the city. We've seen the like 9 blocks that are around us, and that's about it. And we don't know what the lesson is going to be that we'll learn from this risk yet, but we know it'll be there because we've been through it before.
Yeah, I just think that you shouldn't turn down something because you're scared. Risk is always, always, always worth it, regardless of the outcome.
Unless it's murdering someone.
Well, yeah. Again, within context.
So thank you guys for listening to this episode of Deeply Curious. Go out there and take some risks.
Jump out of an airplane with
Quit that job. Ask that boy or girl out.
Mm-hmm.
Break up with that boy or girl.
Do what you want.
Yeah. Do the hard things, because the hard things lead to great things.
They really do.
And if not great, then just an experience or a story you can tell on a podcast
There's
later.
no such thing as failure. Only learning.
Right.
And succeeding.
Yeah. Failure is whenever you keep doing something that's not working.
Yeah.
Quitting something that's not working is just learning. You just learned a lesson and moved on.
Exactly.
So if you are continuing to do something that is not working, then you are failing.
Right.
And we're going to end it there. Thank you guys for listening to Deeply Curious again. If you want to help support this show is only possible by our members of the Jensen AV Club. That is our Patreon page. You can go over there and get exclusive content and deeper access to us by going to jensenav.club.
Yes.
Thank you guys, all of our members that have joined in the last few weeks and that have supported us through this transition period.
Mm-hmm.
We have more stuff coming for you guys, and we will see you next week.
Bye.